Hello, everyone. Welcome in to Southeastern 14. I'm Blayne Gilmer. We're here for a special collective conversation that we're going to have with a very influential member of the NIL space, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Guys, make sure that you are subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications for all the content coming out here, because the SEC is as fast-paced as it can possibly be, and the NIL and transfer portal space is as much involved in that as anything. And Walker Jones with the Grove Collective, who will be our guest and bring in here in just a second, is as involved in that as anybody. Of course, we know what Ole Miss has been able to do in the transfer portal. We know the momentum that Lane Kiffin and company have there, also the momentum the basketball team has there. So a lot of great stuff going on over in Oxford, and we're going to get to that here in just a second. Real quick, we do have to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline. Make sure that you hit those guys up if you're wanting to keep up with all the news, trends, and predictions. Guys, the NFL playoffs are right around the corner. Bowl season has come and gone. NBA is in full swing. BetOnline isn't taking a second off, and you shouldn't either. You go check out for all the information on there. BetOnline, it's where all the sports wagering info available to you on desktop and mobile access. Head over there to get into the action. Use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. And now, guys, it is time for us to start with none other than Mr. Walker Jones here. Walker, thank you so much for joining us here on this collective conversation, sir.
Good to be on. Look forward to chatting about all this stuff. It's a busy time and exciting time.
It is a busy time for sure. And I guess what I wanted to ask you right off the bat is just, you yourself, I know that you've got your hands in a lot of different things from a business aspect. You played at Ole Miss, and you went on and had a career in business, and then one the lawyer, started the Grove Collective in that space, and then you get involved in this deal, and it's really been kind of off and running for the Grove Collective. Talk to us just about how you got involved with this and what it's like kind of seeing the start of this NIL era in college football and college sports altogether.
Yeah, Blayne, look, it's, my story is probably similar to a lot of other people. I followed NIL kind of as a fan, casually. I had a basic understanding of it. Obviously, it wasn't around when I played, and didn't really know if I loved it, hated it. I didn't really understand a ton about it, but I knew it was something that was new and was going to probably have a major impact on, the landscape of college athletics. And, so I had, really didn't have a great understanding of it until, really about late spring, early summer of 2022. I started getting a few phone calls from some of our coaches, some of our administrators. We had, as you mentioned previously, we had an attorney named William Liston, who's a great attorney in Jackson, Mississippi, who had started the Grove Collective back in December of 2021. And he did it, got it up and running. He had a great understanding of kind of the legal side of NIL and the Mississippi State statute, and, got the Grove Collective started. And I think did a really good job of kind of putting some of the pieces in place. And then, they felt like they needed somebody else that had more of a marketing approach, kind of a branding, sports marketing type experience, which was, kind of my career in sports. And so it was really a perfect marriage between the legal side and being a really compliant and well organized collective, and then me bringing in some of the marketing tactics, sponsorship, things like that from my background. And we kind of got together. We consolidated. There was a couple different collectives at Ole Miss, and we consolidated everybody underneath the Grove Collective because we felt it had a really good name, a great logo. It had the most resources tied to it. And really, I spent the first probably 3 months just trying to learn, being really curious, asking a lot of questions. What is a collective? What's the purpose of a collective? And what could I possibly bring to the table that could help Ole Miss distinguished itself in this evolving landscape. And so spent a lot of time talking to a lot of my contacts, asking a lot of questions, learning, and then taking what William had put together and trying to relaunch it and grow it across all our sports, across our entire fan base, which we did in, like I said, early fall of 22. And, I think some of those things that we thought early on worked for us. And again, consolidation, education, and then kind of the alignment and tie-in with the athletic department and the athletic foundation, which a lot of schools hadn't done at that time. But our state statute in Mississippi allowed us to coordinate and communicate with the university, which we took full advantage of. And that kind of got us off and running. So I had to learn a little bit about it and then kind of figure out how, when it's your alma mater and you're a former player, you want to do your best and not hurt your school. And so I wanted to make sure that the plan that I was going to put together was the right one for Ole Miss. And I think, through the efforts of a lot of people, we ended up getting a lot of it right in the early days.
Yeah, and that leads to my first question. How are you and your team at the Grove Collective able to get momentum so quickly? It really seems like you guys were on the forefront of a lot of things. I was reading some articles, some message board stuff out there where you guys are planning to do something with being able with businesses to be able to round up to the nearest dollar and all these different type of things. How would you describe your ability to be out on the forefront of a lot of the unknowns on this NIL space and some of the ability to be unique in your approach to it?
Well, I think you just said it right there, where some people may see the unknowns, the ambiguous nature, the undefined scope of the landscape as, paralyzing or, they may discount it because they don't understand it. We saw that opportunity. We saw that as opportunity to be creative, to be progressive, and to kind of forge our own path. And, I think, whether we agreed or disagreed with the model, we thought that there was opportunity for a school like Ole Miss to be a first mover and really take some calculated, risks maybe, but really kind of push the envelope and really take the approach of, hey, we're going to try to blaze our own trail because that's really what we have to do at Ole Miss, given us being in the SEC and, the battles that we have to face with much larger schools and fan bases. And so, that was really kind of my whole process. And a lot of that stemmed from my time at Under Armour when we were battling Nike and Adidas, who were obviously much bigger than us, and how at Under Armour were we a challenger brand and competing against Nike and Adidas, and kind of the same thing Ole Miss has to do and against the Blue Bloods in college athletics. And so we really, looked for opportunity to be really creative, to use the undefined landscape to our advantage. And probably the one specific instance that probably meant the most to us was we were able to we had a press conference before the Kentucky game back in September of 2022, where we relaunched the collective with this plan of consolidation and organization and all that and resources. And so we got everybody in the room together, our athletic director, our coaches, our athletes, our donors, our fans, the media, so they could see that the university and the athletic department were advocating and giving us their stamp of approval. And I think that's what we needed to be able to show people, is that it's okay to give to the Grove Collective. They're doing things the right way. It's legal. It's compliant. And I think doing that press conference to relaunch this new phase of the collective really kind of was the springboard to get us going, and nobody had really done that. And it took me a couple months to get our athletic director in our school to agree to it, but credit to Keith Carter, our athletic director, kind of took a little bit of a asked for forgiveness and permission, and we felt like it would be something that would propel us, and it did. And again, that's kind of how we've approached everything, is to really create our own path forward and be really progressive and creative, and I think our fans have responded to that.
How do you mentioned with coaches there? How difficult is that to go about? Okay, here's what I can talk to coach about. Here's what I can't, because technically they're not supposed to be,
right,
directing the. Is there a structure in place between like you and Lane or you and Coach Beard and all these guys to say, hey, here's here's how we're going to go about this so we don't mess something up.
Yeah, I think that, look, whenever you have people that at the end of the day are like-minded in the end result, then I think you can figure out the mechanics of the relationship. And, Coach Kiffin, Coach Beard, Coach Bianco, Coach Yo, all our coaches at Ole Miss, our athletic director, we all knew that, we had to do this in a very compliant manner. Ole Miss had gotten in some trouble previously, with the NCAA, and we couldn't afford to do anything to jeopardize our university. And so I think we all started with that premise of, look, let's be really creative and let's push the envelope as far as we can, but let's don't go too far and be reckless. And, and I think we figured out how to thread that needle of being really aggressive and progressive while not being reckless. And again, the coaches all kind of agreed with us on that, agreed with me. I played football at Ole Miss when we were on the second worst probation since SMU. So I knew what happens when you run afoul of NCAA guidance and how damaging that can be. And so for me to put my name on this, it had to be done compliant. And I made that really clear to Coach Kiffin and to Keith and everybody. And they wanted the same thing too. So when you're both on the same page there, you kind of figure out the right way to work together. And again, I think that we figured out, okay, look, we're going to make sure that whatever we do, we can stand by it, we can put our name on it, and we're going to do anything that if it ever came to a point of, are we proud of how we've operated? I think we all want to be able to answer that question. Yes. Now, the hard part of that one, to your question, the hard part is we didn't really know exactly what that meant. We didn't know exactly what the letter of law was going to be. And as you well know, NIL changes and evolves daily, weekly, monthly. And so, some things that you couldn't do that now that everybody's doing. And so, we've tried to kind of stay ahead of that. And again, this is where I speak to the alignment with the university, having a compliance department and the resources that Ole Miss had to give us guidance, to give us coaching, and to also be willing to push the envelope a little bit and know that we needed to be aggressive. I think it speaks to why one of the main reasons we've been successful is we had that coordination, that communication, that alignment between the two, and they gave us great counsel.
Yeah, and it just no more famous of a situation than I guess what happened with the young man that Florida was intending to bring in last class, and the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing and promising certain things. So it never made sense to me that, okay, you're going to have these collectives and you're going to be able to try to provide financial gain to these people once they're on your roster, but the coaches can't have any kind of say of who is going to get that. I mean, it just didn't make any sense to me. So I think there needs to be more thought put into that if it hasn't already. Real broad question here. If you ran the NCAA, what would you change about the NIL and transfer portal space now that you've been in it for a while?
Wow. If I ran the NCAA, I don't know. That's a tough one. Look, I think, and I'll give, Charlie Baker and I have agreed on some things. We disagreed on some things, when we were testifying up in DC, but I do respect the job. And I sympathize with what he's trying to do. And, he's trying to come in and change decades of ineptitude and inaction that's kind of led to some of these problems. So I give Governor Baker a lot of credit for, taking on that challenge. And I know he's dealing with a lot. And so while I may disagree with him on certain things, I do agree in the overall principle that there needs to be a national standard. There needs to be there needs to be guidance. Collectives, they may have been created 2 or 3 years ago to get around the rules and to be these booster funded organizations to go get players. And that may have been how they were initially created. But I think we've all evolved now to functioning, efficient, and compliant organizations that represent the university and try to give all our student athletes an NIL platform. And so, there's this big misnomer that collectives want to just operate in this free market without any restriction. And that's not the case. We're for oversight. We're for a national standard. So again, I think, now we may disagree about what that means and how we get there, but I think, we do need some guidance here, and we do need some defined rules that we can all follow that don't preclude athletes from earning compensation, but also give us all the same set of rules to make the decisions we need to make every day. And so, you talk about the transfer, what I would say is there needs to be some restriction on the transfer. Like the transfer portal was created to give athletes a chance to get out of a bad situation. A coach gets fired, coach leaves, they graduate from the school, or they have some sort of life event that happens. Everybody would say we're for those. But this kind of unmitigated, be able to transfer whenever you want, multi times, and you get frustrated at school because they're not paying you enough money, or you don't get to start, or they suspended you for skipping class or something, and just picking up and leaving. I think that's not in anybody's best interest. And so I do think there needs to be some tightening in of the portal where athletes still are able to get out of a bad situation if something happens outside their control, or if they graduate, or if they've been at a school for a certain amount of time. But we're having to re-recruit our athletes 365 days. We're constantly having to re-recruit them and make sure that we're taking care of them. The coaches, the administration, the collective, we're all dealing with it, and it's exhausting. And I think it's not what the true intention of what the portal was created for. So I do think there could be some smart regulations around that about how many times and when you can transfer. And then I just think a national standard would be helpful. Yeah. Right now I think there's 36 or 37 different state statutes right now. So literally everybody can kind of, I can't run my collective like the guys in Missouri can run theirs because of their state statutes different. But yet we're in the same conference, and we're recruiting, we're talking to a lot of the same players. And so again, some sort of preemption or federal preemption or something that creates a national standard that everybody can operate off of as a baseline. And I think that would be helpful regardless of what the geography, regardless of what state you're in. And maybe the NCAA and Congress isn't the one to enact that. Maybe that's the Power Four conferences now. Yeah. They're the ones to say, hey, look, if you're going to be in the SEC, these are the standards that your state statute and your collective have to follow if you want to have access to the revenue and you want to be a part and you want to have membership in this conference. So maybe it's not the NCAA, maybe it's the Power Four, commissioners. I think we've got to be really careful. I testified in front of the Senate back in October, and I think that we got to be careful about asking Congress to do too much. And so, again, I think those are things that we can figure out. So I think, again, some general broad regulations on the portal, and then some sort of national standard that we can all operate off of that would preempt all these myriad of state statutes would be helpful.
In terms of that, what kind of legal agreements or what kind of are contracts needed between the party getting the NIL, the university? And I know that, you got to be careful with employee status and all that, but are contracts needed, or is that just totally unrealistic until you get that standard that you just talked about?
I think they are. Look, and again, we're fortunate enough with our university and our state statute where we disclose all of our agreements. We don't contract with an athlete until we submit that agreement to our compliance department. They give us a check off, and then we go forward with the contracting process. So I do like that. I like that transparency. I like our compliance department checking our work, making sure what we're doing is right and above board and in the best interest of the student athlete. So I don't have any problem with transparency and disclosure behind the scenes of what we're contracting for. I think we got to be careful about, confidentiality of just releasing all these agreements to the public. I don't think that's in the student athlete's best interest, but I do think a check off from the university and some oversight from the university to make sure that the contracting process is fair. It meets relevant NCAA guidelines and state statutes. So I am for that. A standardized contract, I don't know if we need to go where everybody has to have a standardized contract because there's a lot of variability, whether it's a deal collective or a deal with Bose or Beats or FedEx or Realtree or whatever. There's a lot of different, these deals come in various forms. So I don't know if a standardized agreement is truly necessary if you have the disclosure and transparency rules with your university. And I made that comment up on Capitol Hill in our testimony in front of Congress that, at Ole Miss, there's not a contract that I submit that I write without getting the check off from the university. So I think that gets around some of these predatory practices and these awful deals that you hear out there. The young man from Florida who signed away his rights and his intellectual property and his NFL earnings, like that would have never happened here because our school would have caught that immediately. So I do think you've got to have one of the two, and I just think the university can be a great, can be a great big brother, so to speak, in that process.
What do you think all this stuff looks like 5 years from now? If you had to take your best guess, I mean, is this just the tip of the iceberg, or where are we headed with all this stuff, in your opinion?
Well, I've said it. I think NIL is going to be here. I think it's going to be here. It's not going away. I think it will evolve. It needs to evolve. Again, we're just now in year 3, and like any free market model, it's going to go way one way. It's going to, the pendulum is going to swing one way, then it's going to swing the other way, and then it's going to end up kind of going back into the middle and have some self-regulation on it. And, I've made that I made that comment in our testimony that, we're just in year 3 of an emerging free market. Are there some things that need to be fixed? Absolutely. Are there some growing pains? Absolutely. Will it evolve and will it change and will it regulate itself just like history has shown us? Yes. But there's far more good being done than bad. The bad things get all the publicity. The good things, maybe get discounted a little bit. And there's far more good being done with NIL than bad. And so I do think that for that purpose, I don't think it's going to go away. But I do think the model needs to evolve. And when I say that, probably the biggest concern is sustainability. When you're just a donor-funded model, donor fatigue is an issue. We're lucky at Ole Miss. We won 11 games in football. Chris Beard's off to a great start in basketball. Our women's team's doing great. I think our baseball team will be good. Our Olympic sports are competitive. So, but that may not always be the case. And in down times when you're a donor-funded model with the ebbs and flows of wins and losses, it's going to be hard to sustain this. And so I do think there's going to have to be a real conversation around sustainability, which is in the best interest of the student athlete long term. And that's going to probably have to manifest itself in some sort of collective bargaining with a rev share, the grant of rights, the hundreds of millions of dollars pouring in through these grant of rights deals with the TV contracts. I think we're going to have to figure out what percentage of that is going to find its way to the athletes to take the pressure off this being a 90-95% donor funded model, because I just don't think that's going to be sustainable for the vast majority of schools out there, which again hurts the student athlete in the long term. So I think that's why the model's got to evolve. And again, maybe I don't know if the NCAA can do that. I don't know if Congress can do that. The more I think about this, I really think the commissioners of the conference commissioners, specifically the Power Four, have a great opportunity to grab this conversation and try to shift it in that, because we really don't want the federal government dictating what a rev share is in college athletics, because it probably won't be pretty. And it could actually end up affecting those marginalized athletes more if we let some sort of federally mandated rev share take place.
Lane Kiffin has been out as outspoken as anybody out there, saying, hey, basically what they've done is they've allowed legalized cheating now. He said there were terms free agency. It's free agency every year. So that's why I was asking about contracts, or not in terms of a standardized contract, but maybe some accountability on the player side as well, because a lot of the public argument is out there, okay, well, if basically these young men and young women are getting compensated, there now should be treated like adults, and there ought to be some, whether you sign for a 2-year period or a 3-year period or something along those lines. Do you think there needs to be some accountability on that side of things?
Yeah, again, I mean, we're caught in this perfect storm of no man's land between a professional model and a collegiate amateur model. And, you can argue it either way, but, we're at the point right now where, it looks like it's a professional model. It looks like an employment model, but yet the historical definition and perception of amateur athletics doesn't want to dictate that and doesn't want to go to that point. And, and I do think I have a couple friends who are NFL GMs, and I talk to them all the time about this. And they're like, man, I can't imagine being in
every
running.
year. Every year, people are unrestricted free agents.
Yeah, it's like, can you imagine being an NFL GM with no salary cap, no collective bargaining? You have to raise all your money. You
Man.
don't, and your players, you can do a deal with them and they can leave at any point. And
it's not binding, right? There's no binding.
There's nothing really to hold the players really, as long as they're meeting the minimum academic standards, there's really nothing to hold them there. And so, the market's not set up, the model's not set up for a long-term sustainability because we're caught in that no man's land. And we're going to have to decide what that's going to look like going forward. And so, and there's that battle between the traditional definition of college athletics and this emerging definition of what it's going to. And change is tough. Change is tough for all of us. And again, I don't love a lot of the aspects of it, but I think it's inevitable. And if we stick our head in the sand and think it's going to solve itself, then I think we're doing all the athletes a disservice. So, Jack Swarbrick, who was on that panel with me, he brought up a great point, is that maybe Congress's most beneficial involvement in this could be creating a special status where there is collective bargaining and there is, the ability to somewhat be treated like an employee, but don't have all the things that come with employment, unionization, and all those other things that are scary to people, and so maybe Congress can create an exempt status or a special status where, it kind of solves both sides of that argument. And it allows for collective bargaining, but doesn't take it all the way into full employment mode where you've got unions and, Fair Labors and Standards Acts and all those types of things, coming in there. And again, maybe that's realistic. Maybe it's not. I'll leave the much smarter people than me to figure that out. But I do think that we're dealing with a model that's kind of in this perfect storm of, we want to hold people accountable, but we don't want to let go of that traditional definition of what a student athlete is.
And you've been very gracious with your time. Just got a couple more for you here. How elevated are some of these numbers we see reported by media and especially organizations like On3 with these NIL evaluate? I mean, these numbers, it's like, are they just pulling them out of the sky? Like, I mean, I don't understand. Because to me, I was always taught that the economy is built on scarcity there, Walker. And I just don't think that there's that much money floating around out there for everybody to be getting $1 million here, 3 million here, 8 million at Tennessee, all this kind of stuff. I mean, how elevated are some of these numbers?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, there definitely is some urban legend and some misinformation out there. I will give On3 credit in the fact that they have tried to really make a concerted and deliberate effort to try to put some metrics into this model. And so I do like that. I do like the fact that On3 is, and I've met with those guys, and I think there are a lot of really smart people at On3, and they're trying to come up with some way to evaluate, roster value versus, market value, and how do you create, what that number is for a student athlete, how impactful are they for a brand ambassador, but how important are they for the roster, and how do we create, that some sort of valuation. So, I do, salute those guys for trying to figure that out. I do think that it isn't scientific. And, I'll hear a lot of times kids will tell me, well, my On3 valuation was this. And I'm like, okay, explain that to me. Well, I don't know. I just pulled it up and that's what they said my On3 valuation was. And I say, well, we can argue that both ways. And so, again, I think that, and that's probably the question that I get the most that I don't have a great answer for is, determining valuation. Now, I will say that, we we work really hard about putting a process in place. I try to take my sports marketing mind from my Under Armour days and my days at CAA as an agent to try to determine kind of what that market value could be. And then we do have great conversations with our coaches and our staffs about, you know, how important is this player to your roster, and how, you know, what's their level of talent, and, you know, how productive they're going to be. Because look, the more productive you are on the field, the more marketable you are off the field. Yeah. And try to figure out what that correlation is. So I think we've worked really hard to try to create a system at Ole Miss where we're just not arbitrarily throwing darts against the wall. Like, all right, I think this player's worth this, and man, I don't know, let's see, this player's worth that. You know, like we try to do it, but again, it is a challenge, and it's not scientific. And it's probably, if you talk to any collective leader out there or any coach, you know, it's probably the one question that probably stumps all of us.
Is the Ryan Day rule real? Ryan Day famously came out and said, guys, it's going to take $13 million a year to keep us afloat on this NIL space at Ohio State. Is that a real deal there? Is it that kind of cash that has to be collected every year for a football program?
I don't love those things. When people make those statements, I kind of just cringe a little bit. Like, where you pull that number from? You know, like, now I think these coaches aren't idiots like Ryan Day going, well, I'm going to ask for the moon, and if I get it, then great. And if I don't get it, I can tell everybody, well, I told y'all it was going to cost $13 million, and we only raised $7 million. So it's not my fault that we're getting beat by Michigan. And, you know, Matt Rhule telling everybody that he needs $1.5 million for a quarterback. You know, and, you know, if he doesn't get $1.5 million to pay a quarterback, then he can say, well, I didn't get enough money to go get the quarterback, so it's not my fault. You know, so again, I think there's part of that, coaches who are masters at creating leverage and deniability, you know. So I think when I hear people say, like, it's going to take this amount of money, you know, I've always been the proponent of, and again, at Ole Miss, we kind of have to be this way. And I say it all the time, and I kind of picked this up in my days at Under Armour. We got to make $1 spend like $3. We're never going to raise more money than anybody in the conference. We're never going to be the guy paying the most amount of money. But what we have to be is the most impactful and the most efficient with our money. And if we're going to spend, I don't know, $6 million in football, we better be really, really impactful. And our margin for error better be really small, because somebody's going to spend $9 million that we're going to play this year. We played, you know, again, I won't name any names, but we played a bunch of teams this year that I know for a fact spent more money than we did, and we beat them. And so, again, now, is that because we spent our money better? No, that's not 100% right. But we have to figure out a way to make our dollar stretch further, because that's the type of school that we're at Ole Miss, where other schools may have an endless stream of the money coming to them. So I just think it's, when I hear people say these absolutes, I'm like, where are you getting that from?
And this is the last question for you here. Was this offseason the perfect time to be aggressive in the transfer portal, in the NIL space for the football program at Ole Miss, because of what you guys were retaining, and also the 12-team playoff coming next year, and there being a real opportunity with the talent you guys have, the success that Lane has built, and what is now going to be in that locker room and on that field there for Ole Miss to really jump into the tip top of the national conversation? Was this just the perfect confluence of events?
You nailed it. I'm glad you asked that question, because this was a deliberate plan for us. And again, it doesn't mean that it's all or nothing in 2024. And if we don't win the national championship or finish in the top 4, that we're done. But we did make a concerted effort 18 months ago, 2 years ago, saying we think the 12-team playoff is going to be the defining moment in college athletics. You know, March Madness has been around forever and is phenomenal because of what it is. This is our version of March Madness in college football. And I just think there's never been a more monumental shift in the number one, you know, monetary sport in all of college athletics like the 12-team playoff. And we need to be in that first 12-team playoff. And so not only did we want to make it a goal of, you know, the decisions we make now, meaning 2 years ago, are going to determine if we'll make it in 24. You don't just wake up in June of 2024 and go, man, I hope we can make the playoff. Like, you got to build this thing months and years in advance. So that was a definite goal for us, is how do we put a team together over the next 2 years to put ourselves in the best position to be one of those 12. And then when we saw the type of roster we had this year and our ability to win 11 games for the first time in school history, and what I think the type of culture we had in the locker room to get those guys to come back, that if we can go be really aggressive in the portal and go plug a few holes, the Georgia game, as painful as it was that night in Athens, I mean, we got the crap beat out of us. But I remember sitting there, and I've heard Lane say it too, like we all saw that and go, okay, this is where we are in reality, and that's what we need to get to. And what are we missing to get to that point? And so literally, for as miserable as a night that was in Athens, it was kind of a defining moment for us to say, okay, now we know what we have to do coming up here in 2 months to put a team in place that could beat a team like Georgia in a game like that and give ourselves a chance to get in the 12-team playoff. And so that Georgia game was a defining moment for us that validated the plan that we had for the last 18 months of what we need to do to be able to do that. So, yes, it was intentional and it was deliberate.
Fantastic stuff, Walker. Thank you so much for joining us and educating really a lot of us on this new, like you said, year 3, but it still seems like it's new and nobody knows what's going on. So we greatly appreciate your time. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in here on Southeastern 14. Remember, we're presented by Bet Online, and we will catch you guys next time to talk more, not only Ole Miss football, but all SEC football right here on Southeastern 14.